And today we are talking about part 3 on what you should have been told when you were diagnosed with PCOS. Now, don't despair if you missed part 1 or part 2. I have all of them on my Substack. They're free to access. And after every live that I do, I send out a follow-up email with all the links and things like that. So I'll put links to that as well. And part 1 and part 2, really the way I picture them is like breaking down the noise and why you were given the wrong tools, like what made them wrong. And today I hope to give you information that helps you to build back up. And it's just really the beginning. It really is the beginning foundation to help you to figure out what works for you. But before I get to part 3 of what you should have been told with your PCOS diagnosis, I want to just remind you of a couple things. One, especially if you have PCOS, I have a couple podcast episodes that I've released recently that have PCOS as part of the heart of it. The first one is a special podcast that's just on PCOS and ADHD, an episode, not a whole podcast series, but just an episode where I spoke with Becca King, who is the ADHD nutritionist on Instagram. And I love her work because not only is she someone that has lived experience and has really great helpful pointers, but she also lives with ADHD. Now, she doesn't have PCOS, but we had a conversation basically just unpacking what we've noticed about people who are living with both. And so check it out. Let me know if it's helpful to you. And I do highly recommend her book. It's fabulous. Anyone in your life who has any kind of executive functioning um, fatigue, which honestly is probably a lot of us who are aware of what's going on right now. We're having a lot of executive function fatigue and taking care of the things that you need to do just to feed yourself, like go to the grocery store, do some meal preparation. She has such great information in her book on that I actually told my oldest kid who's 17, I was like, I really want you to read this summer so you can just get ready for college. She has one more year of high school. And I'm like, it'd be good for you to learn some of these things. And the way that Becca talks about nutrition in her book, totally, I agree with because it is non-diet through and through. So with that being said, check out that episode. It's on my Find Your Food Voice podcast feed. And then last week's podcast episode was another episode you may like to listen to if you have experienced binge eating or any eating disorder, really. It's an episode where I feature a listener letter who's describing their anorexia and having years of restriction and fearing the binge experience. And then they eventually did start binging and they're just stuck in that place. And I chose this letter I invited a guest on. Her name is Katie Harvey, and she's someone who specializes in helping people with binge eating. And I chose it because it's something that I heard in my office so frequently is either folks who were in the throes of anorexia and really were scared about binging, or people who did have a past history of anorexia and then were binging. It's really very common, especially for clients of mine who also had PCOS. And I know the way that the world talks about binge eating is this like negative thing, but when a person's body has been going through the trauma of restriction for so long, binging is something that has helped people to survive. So, so that episode has some uh, important tools that I think you can add if you are someone who can identify with that letter writer. So then 2 more things, if you're not much of an audio learner, I have 2 essays that just got published in different, what's the word? In different areas, I guess. One is on Project Heal, their blog. I have a new essay that is all about if you were told you have to cut out carbs, what can you do to also help to continue to maintain your recovery? And then on Jessica Thiel's blog, which is on Substack, her podcast is called Nope, That's Not Normal. And she talks a lot about different types of concerns with eating disorders. But on her Substack blog, I posted an essay on the intersection of PCOS and eating disorders. So I'll put links to all of that in the follow-up email that you'll get after this live. So make sure you subscribe to my Substack so you can get that And I'll have all the links to that to make it easy for you. Okay, so that's all of like the housekeeping type stuff that I needed to do. But let's get into part three of what you should have been told when diagnosed with PCOS. And there's kind of two sections. There's four things that I'm going to tell you here. The first two are what I encourage you to look for to help meet your symptoms. Now, in part one or two, I can't remember which one, I really wanted you to list the symptoms that bothered you the most living with PCOS. And what causes all the symptoms with PCOS really comes down to two areas of your physiology. And the first one is higher insulin levels. And what I encourage you to do, and what I wish you were told when you were diagnosed, is that you want to find sustainable, that's the key word, right? Sustainable long term methods to help keep your insulin lower. So, these are sustainable tools for you. Now, there are lots of things that you'll hear other people doing to help manage their insulin levels, but for you. And you may find some people can cut out foods or eat at only certain times. Excuse me. And that may work for them, but for you, what works for you long term? And when I say insulin, a lot of people with PCOS will tell me, well, Julia, my doctor told me I don't have high insulin levels because my A1C, the hemoglobin A1C, was normal, or my blood sugar is normal. So I don't have high insulin levels. And this is kind of like a bonus thing that I wish someone would have told you, but having PCOS, 95% of people with PCOS have high insulin levels. And there are lots of conditions where insulin levels go higher. I have insulin resistance, which is a condition that has high insulin levels. People with type 2 diabetes or prediabetes often have high insulin levels too. But there's a difference with PCOS. Your insulin levels are so much higher than everybody else without PCOS and also have insulin resistance that your levels are so high that they basically compensate and will make your A1C or your blood sugar levels look normal for a very long time. But you will feel like crap. Like you'll feel the symptoms of high insulin levels and blood sugars that are harder to manage, even though it shows up on the lab work as normal. Well, and again, this happens because insulin levels are just so tremendously high. There is a lab that you can ask your doctor for, that's much better. It's called an IR test. So it's just the initials I and R. So it stands for insulin resistance. It used to be called a different, and my bangs are bothering me today. There we go. It used to be called HOMA IR. So, little trivia, I guess. But now it's just called insulin resistance test, or IR. And it basically takes a fasting insulin level and a fasting blood sugar and puts it through a calculation and gives you and your healthcare provider the information on how much insulin your body needs to make your blood sugar normal. This is so much better than an A1C, because an A1C is just the average blood sugar over the last 3 months. That's it. So if you have lots and lots of insulin, your blood sugar is going to look normal most of the time, unless they catch it every single second. Now, many people ask me, why can't I just get a fasting insulin? And that's a great question. And that's what we used to recommend before we had this like wonderful calculation. But a fasting insulin is not like a fasting blood sugar. Fasting blood sugar, when you take like a finger stick and you put it through your glucometer, it's pretty much your blood sugar right then. Maybe a little bit of minutes um, variation, but it's pretty much your blood sugar right at that moment. And a fasting insulin is the average insulin over the last 3 weeks. So it's not like a real snapshot. It's just not as dependable. So now that's why this calculation was invented. It's a way to make that work. So finding ways for you to lower insulin sustainably is really important, because if you have irregular cycles, like if you haven't gone through menopause yet and you still have a cycle, irregular cycles, if you have fatigue, if you have intense cravings, if you don't sleep well, those are all worsened by high insulin. So finding tools to keep insulin lower will help your like long-term trajectory with PCOS. And the thing that you also have to keep in mind, like I told you in a past um, part of the series, PCOS is this chronic condition. So it's something that just will worsen the older you get. And what I would expect you needed to do is the older you get, the higher your insulin will be. So you'll need to add more tools. And that doesn't mean you're failing anything. It just means you're living with a chronic condition. So yeah, if you can kind of keep that on your radar, I just need to have tools that work for me to help keep my insulin levels lower. Now, the next one, actually, before I even go there, I want to mention there's a lot of research that's out about how dieting and cutting out carbs and sugar or doing intermittent fasting or, just things like that, how they can help lower insulin levels. And one, yeah, if you were a lab rat or lived in a petri dish, fine. Yeah, cutting out things would probably work just fine for you. The research that we have on humans and insulin levels with diet restrictions, those are very limited studies. They are very short studies. Most PCOS, in particular, PCOS and insulin research studies are 6 to 12 weeks long. And yeah, they look great. They look like they can really help insulin levels. But the longer the studies go, when they start to go 6 months out, it's showing that insulin levels are going back up. And we don't have any long term research, diet research, in PCOS. Um, so we have to look to general studies. And what we know with the general population is that the longer someone diets and the more frequently a person diets, the higher their insulin levels will be. So, knowing that insulin is a part of what makes your PCOS symptoms worse, you want to have tools to keep insulin level lower. And insulin may in the short term be lowered by a diet, but long term it'll probably just worsen. So that's why I'm like, find sustainable tools. There's many non-diet ways to help your insulin levels. And it's something that I talk a lot about. And, if you get into my kind of like vortex of blogs and podcasts, you'll find so many where I'm talking about things you can add that may be a sustainable tool for you that can help lower your insulin levels. Okay, so let me go to number two. This is the other kind of pillar that I think is really important. And you want to also find sustainable tools that work for you long term that helps to lower inflammation. Just like insulin, chronic inflammation is a part of the PCOS experience. Researchers have found over the last years or so um, more evidence that most of you with PCOS have chronic low grade inflammation. And when you get into the inflammation discussion areas, you got to be very cautious because it is a dumpster fire of diet culture gimmick. And it's kind of similar with insulin. There's short term research about inflammation and restriction and how it can be helping with inflammation. But long term, it shows the same as it did with insulin that the more someone diets, whether they're going on the diet and off the diet or staying on it the whole time. But basically, once a person hits the 2-year mark of dieting, inflammation levels are worse than they were in the beginning before they started. So, what are some sustainable tools to keep inflammation levels lower? You may wonder, like, how do I know if inflammation is high? It's something that I talk a lot about. And again, if you go into some essays that I've written or podcast episodes, I have lots of information on that. But there are some labs that you can get drawn. There is a cortisol, of course, or there's C-reactive protein. But you also can tell by how your body feels. Your body will tell you when insulin levels are higher by the irregular periods and the cravings. And it's similar with inflammation. Your body will tell you when you have more inflammation, when you have very painful fatigue. And if you have that type of fatigue, I that's so different than just being tired. Like the really painful fatigue, that is most likely coming from high inflammation levels. And yeah, finding ways to sustainably lower that or to keep it from going higher is going to be really, really important. And, there's something that's really important also to name in this process. And this is where not everyone's going to have access to the same tools. And why nuance is important because if you look at what causes inflammation, although it's right now, it's definitely trying to be scrubbed out of like research and university conversations. Those of us who work in this space in nutrition have tried I know for the last 20 years, I've been like really working with universities who teach nutrition to make sure we teach about social determinants of health and how oppressive systems impact health and how eating more kale is not necessarily going to bring down inflammation like eradicating racism will. And so if you are someone who lives with many different identities that are oppressed, you will have more inflammation. And there's no amount of kale or intermittent fasting or exercise that you can do that can eliminate that. Like that's where you will need more boundaries and things like that. And that's where as a community, we need to rally for you and fix it. Um, but just know that, like, if you are like, wow, my friend who doesn't experience as much oppressive systems, like she's not experiencing the same types of inflammation. And that may be why, like, you're having to carry so much more burden. And so I just want to let you know that if you're like, why are these tools not working? It could be possibly that. And so that comes to number three. There's two things that I encourage everyone with PCOS to add, and I wish someone would have told you this when you're diagnosed. And you need to, no matter who you are, you need to increase your boundaries. Increase them all over. You know, increase them at home, at work, with your partner, with your friends. Boundaries where you can take care of yourself, you can rest. um, and again, it's because stress is something that will make inflammation worse. And the way that inflammation and insulin work together is like when inflammation is high, it tends to make androgens and insulin higher, which is that's something that's going to impact your PCOS. And same, the other also is true. Like if insulin goes higher, it's going to make inflammation worse too. So having PCOS, stress is going to hurt you more. Diets hurt you more than people without PCOS. So increase your boundaries wherever you can. And now, I know this is not everyone with PCOS, but I mean, so many people that I've talked to that have PCOS, they are such amazing caretakers. I don't know if you are, but I mean, it's hard for me to say 100%, but it probably was darn close, if not 100%. My clients with PCOS were taking care of everyone. They were the person at work that took care of all the hard things. They're the person at home that managed everyone's schedule, that did the grocery shopping and the meal prepping and made sure everyone had their needs met. And yet, at the end of the day, their needs weren't met. And so that's why wherever you can introduce boundaries to allow you to have space, and it may not be anything special you're adding, you're just giving yourself space on your calendar where you can just put your feet in the grass or feel the breeze on your face and just let yourself be for like 2 minutes. That is something that helps to lower inflammation and insulin. And you need that more than everybody else. And then also, if you have PCOS and you don't experience many oppressive systems, if you are someone who holds lots of privilege, then I would encourage you to, join the fight, as much as you can to help your community with PCOS who doesn't have as much access. All right. So number 4, let's get to that one. The other thing I want you to add more than you probably think you need, and I wish you would have been told this from the get-go. Now, I know you were told the opposite, but you need more rest. You need more sleep than everybody else. You may already know this. You may know some people in your life who get like 6 hours of sleep every night and they feel great. They feel fine. But you get 9 hours and you may still wake up feeling like you could have slept another 2 or 3 hours. That is a very common PCOS experience. And a lot of it has to do with high circulating insulin that'll really mess up your sleep cycles. And many people with PCOS have a sleep disorder. And the older you are with PCOS, the more likely you're going to have a sleep disorder. So, however you can set yourself up to have some more boundaries, to be able to go to bed earlier, even if you're not asleep yet, but just starting to have time where you have space again to just be. And then throughout the day, if you can add your like 2 minutes here and there where you can um add rest. And in the Find Your Food Voice book, um, I'll show it to you. The Find Your Food Voice book is the book that I wrote that came out in March. Now, it is a book for people with and without PCOS, but I talk a lot about um, PCOS in it because three of the stories you hear throughout the book are people living with PCOS. And we talk a lot about how to practice inserting more mind body connection to help your relationship with food and with your body. And I teach this method oh my god, called chips, not props, called chips. And chips, CHIP, that stands for check in props. And it's this method of every 2 to 3 hours asking yourself a series of questions. And part of that helps you with grounding. And every 2 to 3 hours, just having like a reset where, again, if you can put your feet in the grass or open a window and feel the air, like the outside air, the breeze or something, and just feel like awake and alive in your body and not be taking care of this everybody else. Those are things that will really help you long term sustainably to help manage your insulin and inflammation levels. And then also if um it also helps you to really set a balance because I know you are told that you have to exercise a ton with PCOS. And I really wish you weren't told that because, especially if you have very high inflammation levels, exercising on top of that is not going to help promote health. It's just going to make inflammation worse. We have enough research to already know that without a doubt. So, letting yourself rest and heal and recover while you're trying to find tools to help lower insulin and inflammation is something that eventually, like when you'll know when your inflammation levels are coming down, when you start to crave movement, that will eventually happen. And the light will let you know when it's time to start adding more movement in. But I know people talk a lot about doing like high intensity movement and lots of like boot camps. And if you love those things, if those make you feel great, then that's fine. But just make sure you're eating enough, which is probably more than you think, eating enough and also like making sure you have rest. Like you probably need to add more like medicinal kind of rest time after high intensity workouts. Now, if you're someone like me and you do not like those types of workouts, I hope you can do the same that I do and just give yourself permission to not do those. And the type of movement, once your body's inflammation levels are coming down, I would encourage you to explore with like what kind of movements do I actually enjoy? Which ones feel energizing? Which ones are fun? Which ones can I do with other people so they can be fun? And yeah, so I encourage you to add rest and add boundaries. Those are two things that I know can be sustainable to help lower inflammation and insulin levels as well. So what I am curious now, as I'm kind of like winding down this series on what I wish you were told about PCOS, and if you're just joining, I have this is my third part in the what you should have been told when you were diagnosed with PCOS, and the other parts you can get to those. They're on my Substack. I'm also going to be sending out a like a summary email after this. So if you subscribe, all the links to them will be in there for you. But I want to know from you what you want to learn next about PCOS. I feel like I have this like vat of PCOS knowledge just because for 25 years I helped people one on one. And I was doing this while I was specializing in eating disorders. So I came to this place of helping people experiment with a lot of different tools that also were okay with eating disorder recovery. So I have this like practice based evidence because we don't have a lot of research on what actually helps PCOS without dieting. But I have all this evidence just from working with clients who could not diet because of their eating disorder recovery. And I'm like, I want to share that with you. Like, I want to share more tools that can help you. And I'm mostly here on Substack, but if you're like, Julie, I just need to hear it all. I want to hear all the tools. Well, I do have like a self-paced course that you can take, and it's a monthly membership. So you can just spend as much time as you need in there. And, that's something that you can access anytime. I don't like have launches or anything like that. It's always open. And it's definitely something that you would just self-pace on your own. Yet, if you want to ask me a question, you can. Like, there is a place in the community kind of I host it on Circle. So it's something that you can like watch all the videos, and you can tag me if you have a question. Like, I within 24 hours, I'll always just answer your question. You can also DM me there if you have a question that you want to keep more private. But I also have an option in that same membership where you can add on monthly calls with me. So if you're like, Julie, I'm ready for it all, let's do it. Definitely check that out. And that's on my website. If you just click the membership button on julieduffydillon.com, you can get to all the PCOS tools that I've gathered over the last, 2 decades. But if you're like, okay, I just want a little bit at a time, and, these 15-minute-ish kind of sessions are helpful for you, definitely let me know here in the chat what you want to know more about with PCOS. And yeah, because I just want to give you what you're wanting. And I feel like I have this like vat of information. I'm like, I could just talk for the next probably 6 months without stopping to teach you things about PCOS, but I want to know what you want to learn. So you can put in the comment here on this live, or you can message me on Substack or send me an email, whatever, all the different things. And I just want to make sure that you have what you need. Also, feel free to ask questions, and I'll be happy to answer them however I can. So before I sign off, I just want to let you know again, I have some podcast episodes that you may want to check out, that were the last two podcast episodes that have some things that were really kind of timely for PCOS. And next week, where my team and my team is Rachel Popick, who's an anti-diet chef and also has PCOS, and Colleen Bremner, who is our hype woman extraordinaire. She's someone who has gone through her own anti-diet journey as well. And the two of them, they help me behind the scenes with a lot of the work that I'm doing. But usually about once a month, we record a chat on the podcast. And so Colleen had found this thread. No, no, she was in a conversation with a group of people, and they were talking about um, gaining weight in a new relationship. And it just brought up a lot of really interesting kind of diet culture, IRL, that we needed as a team to like sift through. And something that I think was really special is a part of this deep dive that the three of us did, talking about like experiencing relationships in a body where I'm in a body that is thinner, so I'm not experiencing the same types of experiences that they are, but just talking about how people react to bodies changes in relationships, the fear that comes up with that. But the really special thing that happened is someone posted somewhere, I don't know, in the internet somewhere, and Colleen's partner um, reacted to a post on someone like saying something like they didn't like their partner's body now that they had gained weight, and they were like, we want to hear what men have to say about their partner's body changing. And what he wrote, basically, I think everybody needs to hear. Like, hearing what he wrote was just so heartwarming and special. And I think it's going to be something that it'll probably make you cry a little bit too. So like it did for Rachel and I. So yeah. Anyway, so with that being said, I'm going to sign off. I am going to eat my lunch, and then I'm going to prepare that email that I'm going to send to you with all the links to today's um, class. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And actually, as I say that, I'm not going to be able to join you live next week because I will be not in the office, but I'll be back in 2 weeks. But I'll let you know all that in the email too. All right. Bye for now.